welcoming your host, Marisa, the host of Be with Marisa Lee.
Hello and welcome to the third episode of Be with Marisa Lee. Today we're going to be talking about creativity, and creativity is a big word which could mean a lot of different things, but I just wanted to have at least one episode talking about creativity. Starting off this episode, I wanted to ask you, how are you today? Today, as you can see in the video, I got my hair done, and it was really fun because I got to spend time with my friend and she did my hair and we made food for each other. So today was a nice day and I'm super happy with how my hair turned out, and it's really different, but I feel like it also expresses who I am. And putting my hair like this, it's pretty noticeable and a little bit in your face, but it's definitely something that I wanted to do and try. I feel like sometimes being a woman, hair really defines yourself, so I guess that's why I felt so vulnerable kind of seeing the final product of what my hair looks like. But today I'm sitting in a new position and I actually am more comfortable than before, and I still have my plant here, so not too much has changed today. We have a different color in the studio, which is like a peachy color, and I'm wearing, to stay cozy, this sweatshirt I thrifted that says Home Builders Institute, which I thought was funny because I found this sweatshirt sort of soon after setting my intentions for the year, and one of my intentions was to build a home inside of myself and to be easy on myself. So finding this sweatshirt, I thought it was a cool reminder for myself that I'm consistently building this home inside of myself to be there for myself, and that's a continuous journey. So to start off this episode, I want to start off with a question, which is, what does it mean to be creative? And you could take this as a journaling prompt for yourself too, but I know creativity relates a lot to expression, and especially for me, feeling understood in the way that I have these ideas or concepts in my head that kind of come together from feelings or things that I see or inspiration or my reaction to things. So in my head, I create these visuals that I hope to convey into whatever art form, and that just relates a lot to feelings. And I'm a big in my feels person. I just don't show it. I seem pretty chill most of the time, but I'm probably 99% somewhere off in my head, which relates to feelings. So that's why creativity is important to me, because I'm consistently trying to figure out how to convey or draw or paint or talk about something or take a photo of something that I'm thinking inside of my head, which I think is a big deal because it's also something to be grateful for, the fact that I am able to have the resources to express myself. That's definitely something to be grateful for. Also, being creative, like what I was saying earlier, I'm always thinking of myself when I try to express myself, so that's also something to be aware of, is that pretty much creativity can be a way of thinking about yourself. And this is the topic of the word selfishness, because I know it is a very negative word to use selfish towards someone, or when you're describing just someone as being selfish. But I think when the word selfish is used, that's what's making us think taking time for ourselves is being selfish, or being by yourself or needing to take the time for yourself is looked upon as being selfish because you could be doing something for someone else or doing something for work, when sometimes, or most of the times, when you realize that you need time alone is, yes, you could say is selfish because it is something that you need. But in that way, like, selfishness is not bad. Taking time for yourself when you know you're about to be worn out or when you're already worn out. But the word selfish can be another topic for another day. The second thing I wanted to talk about is being in a creative rut, or when people call it creative blocks, which used to scare me because I have so many different ways of art that I like to express myself in. I used to put a lot of pressure on myself to pick one thing, and then one of the things I'd worry about is picking that one thing and then kind of honing in on my craft and then writing into a creative rut. And I feel like that's just something that I worry about when it doesn't need to be worried about, because if it happens, it's going to happen. And usually from those creative ruts, you get a lot of inspiration kind of once that space is done with, once you're kind of done taking a break from creating. So for myself, I found that actually going to design school for one of my passions, fashion design, really led to me being in a creative rut, because when I was going to school, I was drawing for 4 hours straight in one class, or creating patterns, or draping, and just everything engulfed fashion, and being surrounded by teachers that weren't always the nicest, and just everything, all that pressure from doing that every day, even though it was my passion and I knew I loved fashion. Just kind of a combination of doubting yourself or running into negative outside sources, or staying up so late and being overworked because you just want to finish a project. It kind of just made me run out of inspiration, where I found that time where I couldn't even think of designs straight from my head. I was relying so heavily on looking at imagery from the internet and taking certain details and then putting them together, when I know I'm the type of person that can think of designs inside of their head, and it's something that I'm really happy that I'm tapping into now, sort of that intuitive sense about what I know looks good, at least for my own aesthetic when I design. But just going to school for art can lead to being in a creative rut or loss of motivation, but it is different for everyone. But I definitely got into a creative rut pretty much once college ended, and starting my brand also did not help the cause, which I did talk about in last week's episode, how just being overworked kind of leads to being in a creative rut. Even when I got into a creative rut for at least several years, up until maybe last year, because of all the free time. So what do you do with your free time? I mean, everyone spends their time differently, but I decided to start drawing again, getting into art, got into ceramics again, and I even actually sewed a jacket for the first time and a matching skirt. So I think it all just says that being patient with yourself when you're not feeling creative at all, and you knew that you were creative at one point. I think comparing yourself of, oh, I'm not doing something right now, and thinking that you're such a creative person before, you are still that creative person, but I think it's just maybe your mind telling you that you could take a break from creating and just focus on other parts of your life. That could be one thing that means, or it could mean exploring another type of art that you never even would have thought of for yourself, and having that be your source of inspiration to get back into that original art form, because everything you do really influences yourself. So even if what you're exploring, say writing, for example, but then I really like to paint and draw and make ceramics. Writing has really helped inspire me again, just to have like these ideas in my head and search around the internet for different magazines and reading their articles, which led me to seeing more imagery that I'm really inspired by now. So some feelings I had when I was in a creative block was really feeling the need to express myself, but then I wasn't feeling inspired to make any sort of art. So I guess that's when there's some conflict, because especially for myself and what I was saying in the beginning, making art is a way for me to express myself. So then when I didn't feel inspired to even get dressed in like the style that I usually like to wear, or drawing, like seeing a notebook and I want to draw on it so badly, but then I don't know what to draw, and you just kind of get frustrated with yourself, because it's like, I know I like to express myself through drawing, yet when I look at a notebook, I'm not excited to sit down and draw something. And drawing relates a lot to being hard on myself too, especially growing up, because I always have these ideas in my head and I'm not able to execute exactly what I'm thinking of visually, which before I was hard on myself for, but now just from therapy and being kinder on myself and being more aware of kind of the networking of my brain, I'm not hard on myself, and it's more of me being aware of pretty much everything that goes on in my head and being there for myself. So when it comes to creativity and I don't feel like creating or using that medium anymore, I'll just be easy on myself and say, okay, let's try something else for today. And that could be me just looking up inspiration on the internet, or something else I really like to do, which I started up again recently, is subscribing to people's newsletters, because there's so many people that kind of handpick their favorite things and then put it into newsletters, and it's so cool. That's how I find my inspiration now, because I see the aesthetic of someone I like or a brand that I like and subscribing to their newsletter and seeing their inspiration. It's kind of like this domino effect that I try to use for myself, just with finding inspiration, and then from there just seeing all the art there is, besides just looking on Instagram too, because there's so many websites out there where you can look at beautiful photos or visually engaging digital art, which I recently was exploring on Twitter, and I didn't realize you could do so much with digital artwork. And that's not even like the hand painting or using the iPad, but it's actually using programs to just create these beautiful, moving, flowing works of art that you could look at. So, for getting out of a rut, I sort of touched on this earlier, but this could involve being inspired in other ways, like the newsletter, or going to museums, or watching classic cinema or movies with really good cinematography, and there's so many lists of them, or looking at magazines, and it's really cool how magazines pretty much are all online now. So even if you have to subscribe per se to their magazine, you could just look at all their posts on their website, which usually will have the articles that are in the magazine. And something else I'm really interested in recently is architecture, and that's one of the things I'm manifesting for myself also, which is I want to buy a plot of land and build a modern Japanese home on the land and just watch the sunset every day and do my ceramics and my podcast and any other business that I'm able to do. There's so many artist websites where you just subscribe to their newsletter and each week they're sending you all this new work from different artists that you would have never found because Instagram controls what you see. So the way that I find most of my art websites though is actually through Pinterest, which I think is really cool because I'll save different graphic design or art illustrations that I see onto boards, and then most of the time those pictures are linked to interviews of the artists that made that art. So that's especially cool, just learning what inspires different people. And that's actually a way to start finding inspiration, is looking at who you're inspired by and then finding out who inspires them and then learning about those people that inspired this person you're inspired by. And usually the case, you'll also really like the people that they're inspired by. Another thing you could do for getting out of a creative rut is doing art that's not that art. And when I say that art, is if you sort of have this medium for yourself that you think is kind of like your thing, you could try a totally new way of expressing yourself through art. So I would say drawing and painting have always sort of been my go-to way of expressing myself easily, because I could just draw in my sketchbook or draw whenever I just don't feel like working on something for school or just working on anything else in general and I just want a break. So I always go to drawing in my sketchbook and I make that accessible for myself. So when I got into a creative rut with drawing and sketching, I eventually found my way naturally into one of my main interests now, which is film photography. And that was really a natural process of falling into that. But I think because I let myself be open to exploring other mediums, that's what helped me gain such an interest in photography or film photography. And sort of the way I fell into this new hobby for myself is that I would do photo shoots for my brand and just seeing other film photographers, getting to play around with one of the old film cameras that my family had, and then exploring the different types of film. And now I just treated myself to a new camera because I wanted to invest in this activity that does make me happy. And that's another thing, is investing time in what makes you happy. Like maybe art is your thing, but then it's not necessarily bringing you the most pleasure. You could ask yourself, what makes me happy? Or what gives you pleasure? Or what makes you excited? And those things you could actually see from maybe what you watch on YouTube, like what are kind of the topics or themes that you're watching the most on YouTube, and then maybe exploring more into detail about what those hobbies are. And something else I started to do, which is another form of expression that's totally different from making art or like sketching, is actually writing. And I didn't realize I was interested in writing because I always associated writing with essays from school and always having to write essays and completely hating them and having to do them in forced amount of time and read books that I wasn't interested in at all. So that's how writing was sort of associated in my head. So then I never really thought I liked writing per se, but recently I started writing the articles for the podcast, or also just ideas in my head that I want to kind of express in longer ways instead of just keeping it in my head, and that is writing. And I've been journaling for the past several years now already, and I realize that's a form of writing, but then I just don't call it that because it's in my journal and I don't it's just so like casual and normal to myself, where you think writing is usually to get something done, not as a calming time to reflect or express yourself. Writing was sort of just taught in school as a way to get something finished and done and like out of the way. And now I use writing as a way to express myself and take time to sit with myself, essentially. It's finding those things where you want to take time to sit with yourself and be with yourself and dig deeper and express yourself, just to be inspired in any way, whether it's what you thought you were interested at one point, which would be art, and just learning more about other things, because you can take all these learnings and really combine them, and then they'll all just kind of bounce off each other with energy to be inspired by. And so the outcome of getting out of the creative rut was I realized I like writing, I'm making this podcast now, and I'm getting back into ceramics. And these are all things that I had dabbled in before. I mean, not the podcast, but things that I just kept making up excuses for myself not to do because those things were related to school, because writing was related to school and I had taken ceramics classes when I was in school. So I think just it's all about like I allowed myself to explore these things that I sort of was interested in but didn't give enough attention to. And so it's just about being open. And with the photo shoots that I mentioned earlier that I like to do with film photography, now I'm at the point where I'm developing my ideas or creative direction more in depth and finding inspiration from outside sources so that the vision that I have in my head, I'm able to communicate that through the visuals of inspiration that I'm able to find, or just reading articles of how other people's creative process is and understanding the language of how they express themselves helps me express myself more. So I really love developing ideas for photo shoots now. Like I'll go really in depth and I won't want to work on a photo shoot unless I know I have a clear direction so that I could share that direction with other people that I'm collaborating with. And when I develop ideas and know that I only want to photograph these ideas, especially because I use photography as a way of self-expression versus making money, I know the value that photography has for expressing myself, and the intention is for me to kind of bring this concept in my head to life. I know the worth and value of this activity for myself. That's kind of the second thing with everything I've learned from being in a creative rut and then kind of coming out of it, is knowing your worth as a creative, because it's like you aren't creating for a while. So like the fact that you're creating now is super important, and you need to know for yourself what projects you want to do or who you want to collaborate with versus work with. And that's all about intention too. So when you know your worth, you know the effort you want to put out and into what projects. So something I always try to remind myself so I have a clear vision of a creative project is I'll ask myself, imagine someone hires you for whichever medium you're doing, and to have your rates ready to tell them. And or if someone comes to you with an opportunity to create your dream project, what is that project? Like, what do you want to be working on? And that could be something that you manifest and journal about and just experience the feelings of what that dream project would be, and starting to talk about it and attracting it into your life. And something else that I do to stay inspired is not just being inspired by things on the internet, but being inspired by books that I read or just going on my daily walks around the neighborhood. I love looking at the view of the Bay Area here, or I'll notice the leaves that are laying on the floor and the pattern that it makes, or the ways that the branches twist as I'm walking by them, yet how there's an elegance to it, or maybe a leaf that happens to be red out of all the green leaves. So just kind of noticing those little details around you, and I think that also relates to gratitude as well, because when you take notice of gratitude for yourself, you just look around at everything in awe and how wonderful it is to be surrounded by things, because everything has an energy and nothing is more important than the next. So with gratitude, you can apply that to this world visually, as well as everything that has happened in your life or is happening, and just pretty much everything that surrounds you, your thoughts, yourself, the people that you love, your surroundings. And for finding inspiration everywhere, I wanted to add taking photos of things to have on your phone, so when you look back, you could be like, oh, I took this photo and I was having this idea or thinking about it. And something I love to do for myself is I have this exercise where I create monthly mood boards that I'll use as my home screen. And that's been really fun, with just kind of seeing where my eye is visually each month and being inspired by that. For the monthly mood boards, I try to gather my inspiration from 3 different places. So usually I'll try to use taking a photo from my phone that I actually took on my phone, and then another source would be taking a screenshot of something from the web. And then sometimes if you find a quote somewhere that you really like, so I'll take that and use a typography to use for the quote. So that's an example of finding inspiration from 3 different places. And it's nice because, like I said before, technology is everywhere. So I'm trying to incorporate just putting inspiration where I will look pretty often, just out of habit, because technology is there and we need it and we use it. So putting it on the home screen of my phone, as well as on the laptop screen, I use them as like sources of inspiration, my mood board or my manifestation board. And the final thing I'll talk about today that inspires me is knowing my monthly favorites. So this is also related to a journal topic, if you want to make it into one, is kind of asking yourself, what are your monthly favorites? And it helps you kind of rethink things that you saw, or maybe a song that you heard. So I'll have categories such as food, an item, a song, a movie, and a quote. So those will be my monthly favorites that at the end of each month I'll kind of reflect, or even when you start doing it, you'll kind of think about it and be more aware of the content that you're taking in, which is cool, because then it makes you more aware of everything. And then you're just like, ooh, I didn't notice that flower has different shades of pink and red. It's just a really nice way to get to know yourself too, you know, like a little time for yourself at the end of the month, just like reflecting on things that kind of made you feel a certain way or inspired you or made you happy, and then writing them down all in this monthly favorites list. And then when you look at it, it can bring you joy when you're reflecting, which is nice, and a little reminder of where you're at this point in life. Because even I'll look back at my Spotify playlist and just see the ones that I made in high school, and I'll play them and I'm like, oh, this reminds me of the actual happy moments of high school, which it's good to appreciate any happy moments. So I hope this gave a little bit of insight into another person me that has gone through a creative rut and sort of what I've learned from going through it and kind of like the key takeaways of how I try to stay inspired. Thank you to Caitlin for editing this podcast. Thank you for listening and being here, and stay tuned for episode 4 of Be with Marisa Lee. Talk soon.